The first time I found the anonymous letter taped to my door, I thought it was a harmless mistake. By the third one, each one angrier than the last, I realized someone in our quiet, tree-lined neighborhood wanted me gone. Rules I'd never heard of suddenly became urgent violations. Fines appeared without warning, and late-night knocks rattled my windows. I wasn't just dealing with nosy neighbors. This was a campaign to break me. But they underestimated how far I'd go to protect my home. So, when their final demand crossed the line, I set a plan in motion they'd never see coming. Would you fight back? Or walk away? Before the letters, before the late-night knocks, life on Sycamore Bend felt like the quiet kind of perfect. I'd bought the small cedar-sided house 2 years earlier, a place where crickets hummed at dusk and children chased each other between sprinkler arcs. My work as a freelance designer kept me at home most days, and I loved the way morning light spilled across the kitchen tiles while I sipped coffee and sketched. Neighbors waved from porches, and the street smelled of cut grass and weekend barbecues. The neighborhood's homeowners association was always present, of course. Their tidy newsletters arrived every month with cheerful clip art borders and reminders about trimming hedges or keeping trash bins hidden. It seemed harmless. Just the usual rules that kept lawns neat and fences uniform. I read them with mild amusement, filing each one away in a drawer I rarely opened. Still, a few small moments hinted that everything wasn't as picture-perfect as it appeared. At the annual block party, I noticed the board president, a sharp-eyed woman named Carol, counting driveway lengths with a tape measure. When a new family painted their shutters a deep navy, a heated whisper spread through the crowd. Not regulation color. I laughed it off, telling myself every neighborhood had its quirks. But in early spring, subtle shifts crept in. A note appeared on the community bulletin about maintaining consistent curb appeal, underlined 3 times in red. Another neighbor received a citation for planting unapproved flowers. And when I replaced a broken section of my back fence with a slightly different shade of wood, 2 men I didn't recognize lingered on the sidewalk, taking photos with clipboards in hand. I brushed it aside, until one quiet Saturday morning when I stepped outside to water the garden. A pair of unfamiliar cars idled at the end of the street, their windows dark. I felt a flicker of unease but kept moving, telling myself it was nothing. The truth is, I loved my home too much to imagine anyone could threaten it. This house wasn't just walls and a roof. It was the first place that felt wholly mine. Every detail, from the herb garden I coaxed from stubborn soil to the cedar swing hanging from the old oak, held a piece of my life. Maybe that's why I ignored the warning signs. Maybe that's why, when the first official letter slid through my mail slot a week later, its crisp paper and cold language hit me like a storm I should have seen coming. The first notice arrived folded into a stiff white envelope stamped in heavy block letters. Violation. Response required. I stared at it while the kettle hissed behind me. According to the letter, my fence replacement did not conform to the approved color code, and I had 7 days to remedy the infraction or face a fine of $250. It felt absurd. The new section of wood was barely a shade lighter than the rest, something no casual eye would ever notice. I thought it had to be a clerical error and fired off a polite email to the HOA office. 2 days later came the second notice. Urgent reminder. Another fine, this time $500, for failure to comply. No acknowledgement of my email. I called the number on the letterhead. A chipper recorded voice thanked me for my call and directed me to a voicemail box that was always full. When I finally reached a live person, she said she wasn't authorized to discuss specific cases and that all communication needed to be in writing. I started documenting everything, dates, times, photos of the fence with a hardware store paint sample showing the match. It didn't matter. Each week a new letter arrived, the fines stacking like bricks, $750, $1,000, $1,250. Then came the driveway incident. One Wednesday morning, I opened my curtains to find an orange sticker plastered across my car windshield. Improper parking, immediate tow warning. I was parked squarely in my own driveway. Neighbors began to whisper. A few offered sympathetic smiles, but most looked away as if eye contact might pull them into the conflict. Only Mrs. Alvarez next door dared to speak. She leaned over the hedge one evening and muttered, "They're making an example of you. They did it to the Harrisons last year." That night, I found a single-page petition taped to my door demanding I bring my property up to community standards. No names, just 12 scrawled signatures. I decided to attend the next HOA board meeting. The room smelled of coffee and dry erase markers. At the long table sat 5 board members in matching navy blazers, Carol at the center like a queen behind her gavel. I barely finished explaining my case before she cut me off. "Homeowners are responsible for maintaining uniform aesthetics," she said, her voice clipped. "The board has spoken. I asked about an appeal process." Carol smiled thinly. "You can submit a written request for review. Next meeting is in 6 months. 6 months of escalating fines? Impossible." That evening, I sent certified letters, copied the HOA's management company, and even reached out to a local mediator. In response, the HOA issued a compliance inspection, sending 2 men with clipboards to photograph every inch of my yard while I stood on the porch, powerless. A week later, a new charge appeared: unapproved outdoor structure. They meant the cedar swing beneath my oak tree, the one I'd built with my late father's tools. My throat tightened as I read the fine, $1,000 due immediately. The letters grew bolder. Words like lien and legal action peppered the pages. They claimed the right to attach penalties to my mortgage if I didn't comply. I barely slept, jolting awake at every engine sound outside. Then came the night of the floodlights. Just past midnight, harsh white beams flooded my front yard. I rushed to the window to see a private security car idling at the curb, its lights fixed on my house. The driver never got out, just sat there for an hour before gliding silently away. I tried calling the local police to report harassment. They shrugged. "It's a civil matter. I wasn't just frustrated, I was furious. This was my home, my safe place, and now I felt like a prisoner." That's when I started digging. I pulled every public record I could find on the HOA, meeting minutes, budget reports, even old legal filings. Buried in the paperwork were tiny cracks in their armor, unfiled amendments, outdated bylaws, missing signatures on key resolutions. I wasn't a lawyer, but I could read. And what I read told me they were overstepping their own rules. Meanwhile, the harassment escalated. Someone dumped a bag of leaves and trash across my porch. My mailbox was pried open twice. When I set up a motion camera, the footage showed only a hooded figure disappearing into the shadows. Each incident fueled my resolve. I documented every detail, storing backups in the cloud and mailing duplicates to a friend across town. If they wanted a fight, they'd have to fight on record. The next board meeting was my turning point. I walked in with a thick binder under my arm. Carol barely looked up as I took the microphone during the public comment period. "This board has issued fines under an amendment that was never properly ratified," I said, reading directly from their own minutes. "Under Section 4.3 of the Association bylaws, those fines are unenforceable." Murmurs rippled through the audience. Carol's smile faltered. I continued, outlining every procedural failure I'd uncovered. Each point landed like a hammer strike. Carol finally slammed her gavel. "Your time is up," she barked, but the damage was done. Neighbors shifted uneasily, whispers growing louder. Someone in the back shouted, "Is that true?" I left the meeting shaking, but not from fear. For the first time in months, I felt the power shift. The very next morning, I received another envelope. This one wasn't a fine. It was a cease and desist, ordering me to stop defaming the board and threatening legal action if I continued spreading misinformation. A laugh escaped my throat. They were rattled. I wasn't sure what would happen next. But one thing was certain. They had underestimated me. And now I had more than evidence. I had momentum. The certified letter arrived on a wind-swept Monday morning, its heavy envelope creased like it had fought its way through the mail. Notice of lien. Intent to foreclose. I read the words twice before they settled like stones in my stomach. The HOA was claiming unpaid fines totaling more than $9,800, an amount they now intended to recover by placing a lien on my home. If left uncontested, they could force a foreclosure. It was the nightmare every homeowner dreads, and exactly the hammer Carol had been waiting to drop. I felt the panic rise, but alongside it came something sharper: resolve. Months of sleepless nights and careful documentation had prepared me for this moment. They thought the threat would make me fold. They were wrong. I called an emergency meeting with the small team I'd pieced together. A pro bono attorney who'd been quietly advising me, Mrs. Alvarez from next door, and a local reporter who'd been sniffing around after hearing neighbors whisper about strange fines and midnight security checks. We spread every letter, photo, and time-stamped video across my dining table. The evidence told a clear story. The HOA had been enforcing an unratified amendment, issuing fines without due process, and violating multiple clauses of our state's Homeowner Association Act. The reporter's eyes widened as she scanned the records. "If this is accurate, they've got a serious legal problem," she said. "But you'll need to show this publicly, loudly." 2 days later, the HOA held its quarterly special session, an event Carol clearly intended as the grand finale to my humiliation. A notice on the bulletin board called for a vote to authorize foreclosure action against me for persistent non-compliance. The meeting hall was packed that night, neighbors shoulder to shoulder, the air humming with curiosity and unease. At the front, Carol sat beneath a banner reading "Protect Our Community Standards," the gavel poised like a weapon. She wasted no time. "We have before us a homeowner who has refused to respect our rules," she announced, voice sharp enough to cut glass. "The board recommends immediate legal recourse to protect property values and community harmony." A murmur swept through the room. I stood, heart pounding but hands steady, and stepped to the microphone. "I'd like the record to show," I began, "that this board has been operating outside the law for months." Carol's eyes narrowed. "Out of order? No," I said louder now. "You are out of order. According to Section 4.3 of the Association bylaws, any amendment affecting fines requires a 2/3 vote and a notarized filing with the county clerk. That never happened. I have the county's stamped records right here." I held up a folder thick with certified documents. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Carol reached for the gavel, but I pressed on. "Every fine you've issued under the so-called Uniform Aesthetics Amendment is unenforceable. Furthermore, your private security patrols and late-night surveillance violate state privacy laws. I have photographic proof, sworn witness statements, and—" I turned toward the back of the room. "A journalist who's ready to publish everything tomorrow morning." The reporter lifted her camera for emphasis, the flash popping like a thunderclap. The room erupted, neighbors whispering, some outright shouting questions. Carol slammed the gavel, her voice cracking as she demanded order. But the authority she'd wielded for years was slipping through her fingers. One board member, a soft-spoken retiree named Hank, cleared his throat. "Madam President," he said carefully, "is what she's saying true?" Carol's face blanched. "This is a baseless attack," she hissed, but her voice wavered. I pulled the final card from my folder, a letter drafted by my attorney, ready to file for injunctive relief and damages. "If this board proceeds with foreclosure," I said, "we'll see you in court for harassment, fraud, and violation of homeowner rights. And thanks to the open records law, every financial statement you've hidden will become public record." Silence fell, heavy and electric. Hank removed his glasses and looked at the others. "I move to table this motion indefinitely," he said. Another board member, eyes darting toward the restless crowd, quickly seconded. Carol's hand trembled on the gavel. "You can't—" But the vote happened faster than she could stop it. 3 in favor, 1 abstention. The motion to foreclose failed. A murmur of relief swept the audience. Someone clapped. Then another. Soon the hall echoed with the sound of neighbors who, for the first time, weren't afraid. Carol stood frozen, color draining from her face. The gavel slipped from her grasp and struck the table with a hollow clack. I met her gaze. "This ends tonight," I said quietly enough for only her to hear. Her lips parted, but no words came. When the meeting adjourned, people surrounded me, some apologizing for staying silent. others eager to share their own grievances. The reporter slipped me a card and whispered, "Tomorrow's headline writes itself." Outside, the air felt lighter, the night strangely alive. For months, I'd carried a knot of fear so tight it felt like part of my spine. Now it was unraveling with every breath. But as I walked home beneath the streetlights, I couldn't ignore one thought pulsing in my mind. Carol wasn't finished. Not yet. The first time I found the anonymous letter taped to my door, I thought it was a harmless mistake. By the third one, each one angrier than the last, I realized someone in our quiet, tree-lined neighborhood wanted me gone. Rules I'd never heard of suddenly became urgent violations. Fines appeared without warning, and late-night knocks rattled my windows. I wasn't just dealing with nosy neighbors. This was a campaign to break me. But they underestimated how far I'd go to protect my home. So, when their final demand crossed the line, I set a plan in motion they'd never see coming. Would you fight back? Or walk away? Together with a handful of neighbors, Mrs. Alvarez, the young couple with the hose citation, even Hank, we formed a homeowner coalition. Our goal was simple: transparency. We called for an emergency election to rebuild the board and rewrote the bylaws to require open accounting, third-party audits, and clear limits on fines. The first meeting of the new board felt like a gathering of survivors. No gavel slamming, no cold stares, just people sitting in a circle sharing stories and laughter that had been missing for too long. We voted to cap fines at reasonable amounts, to create a mediation process for disputes, and to publish every financial statement online for all residents to see. Carol never attended. Rumor had it she sold her house and moved 2 towns over. Some said she'd taken a job at another HOA. Others claimed she simply couldn't stand to see the neighborhood she once ruled wither from her grasp. I didn't bother to find out. Her absence was its own quiet victory. As spring turned to summer, life slowly returned to the rhythm I'd loved before the conflict began.